Well, welcome, everyone. I am Doug McGetchen. I'm the director of the Peace Studies program here at FAU, and we have a number of wonderful speakers every semester. And I'm here today to introduce a speaker to you, Claude AnShin Thomas. He is here to talk about his experiences in Vietnam and his path of coming to terms with that, and his many pilgrimages, the work that he's done in building a path towards peace. So I'd like to invite you to welcome him.
Is anyone allergic to incense that they know of? No? Okay, first thing, if you have a cellular phone, check and make sure it's on vibration or turned on. And if you'd be so kind, come on over this way, it'd make it easier for me. I'm going to attempt to do this sitting down. I'm sometimes able to do it, oftentimes not. Because it's the topic, I get animated about this topic. I am a Zen Buddhist monk, but I'm not here to sell you Buddhism. I'm not here to promote Buddhism in any way. This is the lifestyle that makes sense to me today based on my experiences. The clothes that I wear these clothes all the time. I didn't dress up for you. It's not a costume that I wear to when I show up in public. I'm also a former soldier. I was a combat soldier in Vietnam. I was wounded and injured quite seriously. I spent roughly the last 9 months of my military service in Ireland Army Hospital in Fort Knox, Kentucky. So I see my life. And I break my life down sometimes in 3 phases. There is the war before the war, and that has to do with the family system that I grew up in and the social structure that I grew up in. The war before the war, then there's the war, and then there's the war after the war. The truth about violence, in any shape or form, is that the consequences of it never, ever go away. The illusion that healing is the absence of something is it's a great travesty that's sort of been that somehow has reached out into individuals' thoughts or in social thinking, or it's like if I have an illness, I can take a pill or something and it goes away. The truth about trauma is that the consequences of it never go away. And the truth about trauma is none of us, not one of us, are free from it. Everybody has their Vietnam. Everybody has their Iraq. Everybody has their Afghanistan. Everybody. If we look at the nature of the society and structure that we currently live in, and how we have been conditioned to view the world. In the United States, let's say, there's an author, his name is James Gilligan. His name is James Gilligan. James Gilligan was the first director of psychiatric services for the Massachusetts prison system. He was the first director of psychiatric services for the forensic hospital, that's for the criminally insane in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And then he headed up what was called the Violence Project at Harvard University. He's also written a book. The title of the book is Violence, a National Epidemic. It's an incredibly insightful and informative book. And what touched me the most about it is he starts from a very personal perspective. He starts from his own upbringing and from his own socialization and from his own culturalization, and how that influences our life now, right now. In this violence project at Harvard, they did a study on gun deaths in the United States. This was back in, I think, I don't know, 98, 99. Now they've continued to monitor this research over the years. And what we see in the United States is that we kill between 33 and 38,000 people every year with guns in this country. Now, you think about this. I mean, this is really cause for reflection. You think about this. We also kill somewhere between 40 and 60,000 people every year on the highways. In cars, 90% of those deaths are alcohol or drug related. That's murder by vehicle. Homicide by vehicle. So you start putting these numbers together, and you see what the consequences of suffering, how the consequences of suffering manifest themselves in our social structure. Now, I was a combat soldier in Vietnam. The official dates of the Vietnam War were 1963 to 1973. I think May 63 to August 73. It could be the other way around, August to May. We actually didn't, the final troops didn't really pull out of Vietnam until 1975. But the official dates of the war, 63 to 73. In that 10-year period, 58,267 U.S. soldiers were killed. 10 years. So you take that number divided by 10. 5,800 and some odd per year. In this country, every year we kill between 33,000 and 38,000 with handguns. And nobody blinks an eye about that. There are no monuments, there are no memorials, there are no celebrations for those people who have been senselessly murdered. It is a war by any other name. 33,000, let's take the low number, 33,000, multiply it by 10, 330,000 in the same 10-year period. Well, our solution to Vietnam was to create an all-volunteer military. What happens by creating an all-volunteer military, is that we create a class, a society and class of people whom we can put off to the side, and the majority of population then don't share the burden of what it is that they're doing. So we're quick to send people off to war because it's not a shared experience. And then when these people come home, we are not quick to give them the support that they deserve. Whether we agree with the war or don't agree with war, it doesn't mean we don't care for the people who suffered as a consequence. Because when I joined the military, and I joined the military at the age of 17, I joined while I was still in high school. I was a senior in high school. I enlisted, there's a pre-enlistment program. So I joined the military before I graduated. So when I graduated, I had like a month and a half, and I was gone. I was on my way to Buffalo, New York, to the induction center. And then I was on a train on my way to Fort Dix, New Jersey for basic training. 17 years old. I was not old enough to vote. I couldn't sign a legal document. I couldn't sign a legal contract. My father had to co-sign for my joining. I wasn't old enough to consume alcohol legally. That wasn't a bad thing, but nonetheless. But I was old enough to be trained and empowered to decide who lived and who died. I've had the privilege of having a book published. What I would like to do is, I want to read just a couple of excerpts out of this. See, I'm not sitting. Our suffering is not our enemy. Society teaches us that suffering is an enemy. We are constantly encouraged to reject what is unpleasant, disappointing, or difficult. What's all this suffering? Let's be happy. Have fun. But our suffering is not our enemy. It is only through a relationship with my pain, my sadness, that I can reach the other side. That I can truly know and touch the opposite, which is my pleasure, my joy, and my happiness. I often relate to my emotional suffering as though it were a physical pain. When I feel physical pain, society pushes me to take medication to relieve it, not to touch it, not to explore it, or seek to understand it. I am conditioned to make every effort to avoid discomfort. Talking and listening. It's when I read this, I go, wow, man, that's really good. But it's really, when I read it, it's like I don't have a direct connection with the truth that I wrote it. And I did. I wrote every word here. Not like a lot of people in my position. A lot of people in my position, like, for example, any book you read by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it's not written by him. Any book you read by a lot of these prominent spiritual teachers or religious leaders, those books aren't written by them. Their names are put on because that's what sells the book. But if somebody's listened to somebody's written in their name, or they've taken talks that have been recorded and transcribed them and published those, I wrote every word. Talking and listening. In the book, Achilles in Vietnam, Combat Trauma and the Undoing of Character, Jonathan Shea, a psychiatrist, writes that recovery from combat trauma depends on communalization of that trauma, on sharing it with a community that can be trusted to listen, hold, and retell the story in an honest way. When I was first suffering the trauma of the war, I didn't understand that I needed to tell my story, that I needed to talk about the experience, and keep on talking about it, because I had never been encouraged to do this. Anyone who has experienced trauma needs to talk about it, and we all have experienced trauma of some sort. I often hear people saying, oh, I could never talk about those things in my life. What would people think of me? I guess those people are trapped in shame and guilt. They may feel there is some safety in keeping things hidden, but keeping all the pain to ourselves does not heal anything. Instead, it fosters abuse. Abuse of self and all sentient beings around us. And then I wrote, in California, I had one of my first encounters with a veteran of the war in Iraq. This was around 2004. This young man had been involved in the initial invasion. After we met, we began to correspond via email. I am a 21st century monk. I have a laptop, it's donated. I have email service, it's donated. I have a cell phone, and it's also donated. People want to keep in, they want to be in contact with me. And so the positive uses of technology. He shared with me that he had been struggling emotionally since returning home from combat. One day he wrote to me, "I've gone a little deeper in my depression. I feel like I'm in a black hole and can't get out. I'll make half-hearted attempts to change, but shortly get sucked back into feeling sorry for myself. I cut myself again. It was worse than the times before. This time I cut a 4-inch deep laceration on my right leg. It required many sutures. I lied about how it happened. The thing about it was, I felt so much better afterward. It was almost liberating. I'm not proud of this, and I'm not bragging, but I needed to tell someone." When I first read this message, I felt a sense of disconnection from this man, just the way I did in combat when I saw other soldiers get wounded. And yet, at the same time, I identified so deeply with his desperate attempt to find some relief from his pain. By cutting himself, he's creating pain that he can see and touch. Maybe this helps him to feel he has some control over it. I've known this kind of separation from myself and the world around me. It can become so cold and vast that it unravels the fabric of existence. It's incredibly difficult to articulate the real consequences of war. It's difficult to articulate it because it's a constantly evolving experience personally. And without the proper kind of support, it is not possible to really understand the relationship between how I am acting today and how my past experiences influence that. Now, I was in 1990, I was invited, I was encouraged, I was in therapy, I was working with a social worker, I was living in Massachusetts. And this social worker understood that, the kinds of things that the kind of issues that I was wrestling with, there wasn't the support for them in the traditional places where support was offered, like the Veterans Administration. I mean, unfortunately, the Veterans Administration, and this is not to disparage the Veterans Administration or the people who work in there, but their mission is really not to support veterans. Their mission is to protect their budget and to protect their employees and to protect their job. To really care for veterans, you have to be willing to invest the same amount, the same dollar values to care for veterans post-military experience that you do in preparing for war. The cost is phenomenal if you break it down into cost. And this agency is not funded in a way that can really support us. So they're looking for ways to cut cost, which means depriving us of the care that we need. They also are not geared to really deal with the truth of the real cost of war. The notion that 30% who experience combat are affected with post-traumatic stress is misguided. In fact, everyone who enters the military is traumatized. They're traumatized by the training that they receive. We are traumatized by the training we receive. I was taught to dehumanize an entire group of people, an entire race of people. The way that teaching exposes itself is, or manifests itself, is that I never refer to the Vietnamese in any other way than through some sort of dehumanizing slang expression. It's even painful for me today to say them. So I just don't. I was taught, for example, when we did bayonet training, and they had a piece of wood that was wrapped with burlap and stuffed with straw, and that we were to envision as the enemy. You see, the enemy was reduced to a burlap sack stuffed with straw. When learning to fire our weapons on the ranges, we have just cardboard silhouette targets. And we're to envision that that's the enemy. So a race of people are diminished to a silhouette cardboard cutout. That's the way the dehumanization process takes place. And when we dehumanize others, we, by course, lose contact with our own humanity. Because it's impossible to dehumanize another and still keep a contact of our own humanity. Now, military training it's not difficult for military training to be effective, because that process starts long before we enter the military. The war before the war. When I was growing up, I was born in Meadville, Pennsylvania. That's center west. It's right on the border. It's very close to the border with Ohio. I lived with my father. He was a school teacher. His first teaching job was in a very small town in southwest Pennsylvania, on the border of Ohio and West Virginia. And then he got a job in northwest Pennsylvania in a very small rural farming community named Waterford. Waterford's like 900 people at the time, maybe. It was just south of Erie, 25, 30 miles. Growing up in this small community, farming community, most of the people who lived in this region were immigrants from Eastern Europe. They were Polish, they were Czech, they were Hungarians, they were Ukrainians. They'd come largely from this region. The grandparents of people I went to school with spoke only their own language. The parents of the children I went to school with usually spoke whatever language their parents spoke, and they spoke English. The children that I grew up with spoke only English. They were already being conditioned away from their social and cultural roots. It really is an act of war, in a way. I did not grow up looking at the world with equanimity. I grew up looking at people of other religions disparagingly. I was ordained in the Protestant church. Although by the time I was 8 years old, my parents, because of their suffering, they just, Sundays they couldn't get up. What happened is I continued to go to church, but I went with my friends. Now, in this community of 900 people, there were 8 different churches and 3 Bible study groups. I went to them all. My favorite was a Bible study group just down the street, because if I brought new kids with me, they gave me candy. I'm telling you, man, they knew what they were doing. I bring all kinds of kids, man. I never viewed Catholics as Catholics. I always had a slang expression for them. I didn't really know any Jewish people, but I never dealt with Jewish people. I mean, I only dealt with Jewish people in a discriminating kind of thought way. I never talked about them as human beings. I never talked about people who believed other than I do in any sort of really humanistic way. They were all different. I was ethnically insensitive. Polish people were not Polish people. There was always a slang expression for them, as there were for Mexicans, as there were for Germans, as there were for Irish. They were all dealt with in dehumanizing terms. Growing up as a male in this society, as a white male in this society and culture, I was conditioned to objectify women, to see women as inferior, and the only reason for the women existing was to serve me, to propagate the species, to cook clean, to do those sorts of things. So I am by nature sexist. I didn't have any choice about this. This is endemic in the culture, in the culture that we're born into. It's U.S. culture. It's endemic. If you disagree with me, just look at the billboards, look at the television advertisements, and look how women are still exploited. No matter what we say, Henry David Thoreau wrote, and what we are screams so loudly, people can't hear what we say. He actually did it in comment about someone. He said, "What you are screams so loudly, no one can hear what you say." It might have been a comment to Ralph Waldo Emerson from the play 8 Days in Jail or something like that, which had to do with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. If you don't know what the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was, it was where the U.S. stole land from Mexico, where the border moved from the border moved some 800 miles south. Oh, almost fell over. I am, because of the society and culture I grew up in, I am conditioned by nature to be racist. I'm conditioned to see people of color as inferior. I don't want to be like that. I just never had a choice. This was the dominant thought patterns that exist. And it hasn't really changed much. We may talk different, but I tell you, as I move through societies and cultures, and I move through all kinds of societies and cultures, both nationally and internationally, this is still a major theme. I talked with a guy the other night, just 2 nights ago, Hispanic. He's dark. And he was looking for some place. He was looking for a church or something. And the directions he had took him into a neighborhood, but it wasn't there. So he was turning around, and the police pulled him over and said, "What are you doing in my neighborhood?" Now, would that same police officer have asked me that? Well, maybe if he saw me dressed like this, he might, but generally not. It's alive and well. Well, it's alive. I won't say well. Now, if I want to see the world become different, then I have to be willing to wake up to my own conditioning. I have to be willing to wake up to my racism, to my sexism, to my ethnic insensitivity. I have to be willing to know that this is how I'm conditioned to view the world. So that when I'm confronted with how I've been conditioned, I then have a choice of what to do with that. I don't have to act in the ways in which I was conditioned to act. However, if I say to myself, well, you know, I'm not sexist, because I don't want to be, I'm just not. But then when that conditioned sexism expresses itself, I won't see it, because I don't want to see it. When my racism surfaces, I won't see it. Or it may surface without my even being aware that it's surfaced. But because I accept this premise about myself, when it surfaces and people bring my attention to it, I have what I call an awakening moment, an aha moment. And I go, now I have information to inform me so I don't have to do that again. That is the process of awakening. It is the process of healing and transformation. It's learning to live at peace with my unpeacefulness. Healing is not the absence of suffering. Peace is not the absence of war. It's not peace is not the antithesis of war. I mean, it's not the avocation of war, but it's not the antithesis of war. If we see them as opposites, then we miss the essential point. Healing and transformation, the healing and transformation that is necessary to really know peace. And when I talk about knowing, I'm not talking about intellectual comprehension. That's another thing. I can read a book and I can comprehend what's going on in that book, but it doesn't mean that I know. The knowing that I'm talking about is an awareness that exists beyond intellect. The only way to get to that place is through a disciplined spiritual practice rooted in self-reflection. It's the desire to become conscious of how of the conditioning that has been passed on to me from the family generations of which I'm a part, and from the collective conscious, the society and culture that I've grown up in. The institutions of education, of politics, of economics, of information, of all those things. Yes, because all those things influence and shape who I am. This is what made sense to me about Buddhist practice. In Buddhist practice, one of the first things I heard is that there is no such thing as a separate self. My brain said, what? But my whole being understood. I understood that. I knew that when I was 10. I am not separate from anything in this sphere of existence. Even though sometimes I feel intensely separate. Yeah, my father was a soldier in the Second War. My grandfather, a soldier in the First War. My great-grandfather, a soldier in the Spanish-American War. Interesting, you know, if you're in Spain, it calls something different. And I'm told that my, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, I'm told that my great-great-grandfather was a soldier in the Civil War. The patriarchal side of my family traces itself back to western Pennsylvania in the 18th century. They settled in the 18th century when Pennsylvania was still a frontier. And I was a soldier in Vietnam. You know, cause and effect. In Buddhist or Hindu language, they call that karma. Cause and effect. The law of karma, if we believe it to be true, the law of karma, then it's true. If we don't believe it to be true, it's still true. That's that place of truth. That's the place of truth that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the truth that exists in relative experience, right, wrong, good, bad, yes, no. my experience of the peace movement or the anti-war movement during the period, let's say during the periods 68 after I came back until the troops were gone out of Vietnam. My experience of the anti-war movement or the peace movement was that it was just another war movement. And I experience that still today. I mean, I've been out on the, when the first Gulf War was, when we first invaded the Gulf War, there was a big demonstration in Washington, D.C. I went. I thought it was very important to be there. And I was standing in a line of people on the steps, just in front of the steps of the White House. The police were all lined up behind me. Oh, man. And they were ready. They wanted to break some heads. Now, I understood. You know, I get it. I understand that training. I understand that conditioning because I've had that training and conditioning. You know, I'm empowered to protect what is right and good for everybody all the time. And I'm the one who knows. I'm the one who gets to decide. Now, standing on this line, there was this young guy. I don't know how, I guess. He was in his late teens, early 20s. And he had a shirt on with a big peace sign on it. And he came running up to this line with all these police. And he was screaming and yelling at these police officers. He was calling them the most horrible of names, obscenities. And I looked at this young guy and said, "Dude, what are you doing?" He said, I said, "Listen to yourself. This is not, they're not the enemy. Think about what you're saying. Look at the shirt you have on. Does anything you're doing represent the peace you want to see in the world?" There were also a bunch of people that I mean, their acts were just provocative. They were burning the flag in front of the police. And I could hear the police talking. You know, they're going to get the fire extinguishers, they're going to charge out into the crowd, you know, with their batons, and they're going to put this thing. And I remember approaching the police. And I remember asking the police, I said, "Excuse me, have you ever been in the military?" And the police officer said, "No." He said, "No, I've never been in the military." And I said, "Well, I want to just let you know, I'm a combat soldier, disabled combat soldier." And I said, "You know, I was under the impression that I fought, that I offered my life, that I sacrificed my health and well-being so that these people would have the freedom to do what they're doing. I don't have to agree with it." And I don't really have an opinion on it. I really don't. I mean, it's a piece of cloth. What do you want to kill people over a piece of cloth for? But what we do, the symbols that we use to act out our conditioning, because that's all that it is. War is only a collective manifestation of individual suffering. The roots of war are not external, they're personal. If we want to bring an end to war, we must wake up to the roots of war in us. And the only way we can do that is first to have the desire, and second, to have a disciplined spiritual practice rooted in self-reflection. And I'm not talking about religion. We have to have some discipline and structure to be able to take the focus that is external and turn it internal. Turn it in on ourselves. And ask the difficult questions. You know, I was ordained in 1994, December 1994. I was ordained in Auschwitz. Auschwitz is a Nazi death camp located in Poland, just outside of the town of Bolshevism. Auschwitz was really two camps. There was Auschwitz main camps and there was Auschwitz-Birkenau. Not only was it an extermination camp, and not all concentration camps were extermination camps. There were only maybe 3 out of 15 or 20 major-sized camps that were really just designed to be death camps. However, everyone that came into the camps was at risk to die. Didn't matter what camp. But in this case, if you weren't immediately sent to the gas chambers to be gassed, you were then sent to work as slave labor in the chemical factory that was just down the street from Birkenau, and you were to live from 1,200 or less calories a day. So you were going to die. I was ordained there at the site of one of the crematoriums, one that the staff of the camp had blown up to try and cover up what they were doing when Auschwitz was evacuated. Because Auschwitz wasn't liberated, it was evacuated, so that it wasn't discovered what was really going on there. But interestingly enough, everybody in the world already knew what was going on there. The U.S. knew what was going on, and they knew these camps existed, and they knew what was going on. They did nothing to intervene in it. The British knew. The French knew. The Allies knew what was going on. And the camp system wasn't just German. They had camps in Germany, they had camps in Poland, they had camps in Hungary, they had camps in Italy, they had camps in Belgium and in the Netherlands. And these camps were staffed and run by pan-Europeans. I was ordained there, and then I walked from Auschwitz to Vietnam. I walked in robes and without money. I begged for everything. This is the vows that I've taken and that I've accepted to live by. Every place I walked was a place of current fighting or past fighting. 27 countries. Maybe 24, somewhere. 24, 27 countries, about 8,000, 5,000 miles, 8 months. Thank you. Sometimes I just have to look. Before my ordination, or in preparation for my ordination, I was ordained in Auschwitz-Birkenau. The facade of the camp is a brick facade, and it has two big doors. They open inward. You have a set of railroad tracks. Have anyone been? Okay. There's a set of tracks. It's set up similar. There's a set of tracks that go in through the main gate, railroad tracks, and then it divides into two and comes to an end. In between those two sets of tracks, this area was called the selection site. So what would happen is that you would have an SS officer with a small wooden table and a ledger book and people would be taken out of the cattle cars one by one. Their names would be logged, their gender and their age. And then right there on that spot, it would be decided by that person whether they lived or died. And it was simple. It was either this or this. Just like in Rome. This or this. Now, I sat in the selection site, fasting and chanting, from sun up till sundown for 4 days. No food, no water. When sitting in the camp, when sitting in the selection site and chanting, my attention kept getting drawn to the guard towers. You see, when people talk about the travesty of the camps, when they talk about the travesty of war, when they talk about Guantanamo, they talk about the victims, or what's considered to be the victims of Guantanamo, the victims of these various camps, but they never talk about the guards. What must have happened to those people that brought them to commit such acts of inhumanity? And if we don't deal with the suffering of the perpetrator in a humane way, then we're only going to keep that cycle of war, violence, and suffering alive. Because within us exists both victim and perpetrator. But yet we carry the entitlement of the victim. Now, if you wouldn't talk to me like that, then I wouldn't have had to. Huh? Yeah. What are you looking at me like that for? If you looked at me like that, if you wouldn't look at me like that, I wouldn't have had to hit you. The entitlement of the victim, you know. If you'd have grown up in a family like mine, you'd carry a gun too. Because the world's not safe. Well, I tell you, a gun doesn't make the world safer. It's only the illusion of safety, and it always leads to the same place. Whether you agree with me or not is unimportant. This is just one of those truths that become self-evident. If it wasn't true, we wouldn't kill between 33 and 38,000 people every year with guns in this country. I walked the border between the United States and Mexico. I walked from Brownsville, Texas, to Imperial Beach State Park. It's in California. It's the border between the U.S. and Mexico and California. Beautiful beach. There's nobody there, except for the young Mexican kids who walk around the fence. Yeah, they do that. They taunt the border patrol. I'm surprised they haven't shot them. That one of those kids haven't been shot. Because that's the conditioning. Oh yes, and by the way, since '94 I've walked 48,000 miles. Kenshin has walked all except for 5,000 of those miles with me. She is an incredibly committed, dedicated, and powerful woman. Without her help and support, a lot of what I do would be much more difficult, and I couldn't do it at the level that I do it. And all the places that I've been, all the war zones that I've gone into, Kenshin accompanies me. Kenshin's German. Walking on the border in Texas, I always walk in the front. One, because I feel safer up there. And two, then I'm the first one people come in contact with. So it's, in a way, it's my way of looking after, and it's a physical way of my sort of looking after the group. This walking we do is a very disciplined spiritual practice. So I walk, Kenshin walks with me, and people are welcome to join, but there is a particular process they have to go through to join. You just can't come along. This is not about spiritual tourism. This is serious business we do. So we're walking along the border, and I think in the first month or so, predominantly in Texas, but yeah, predominantly in Texas, in the first month, we got stopped almost every day by the Border Patrol. And interestingly enough, the people who were from that region, who were Border Patrol, they treated us much differently than the people who weren't from that region. So you had Border Patrol agents who were living and working down there who were from Indiana or from New York State or from Minnesota. And I tell you, those people were dangerous. They were just insensitive. Everything was the enemy for them. I understood that. I understood it because I have received a similar kind of training. But when you could see the green and white trucks. They would drive by, or they might drive this way, and then you see them come up this way, and then they'd pull off the road in front of us, and I'd go, oh, here we go, and so we would just keep walking, and then they would get out of the car, and then the Border Patrol, if they're right-handed, they would approach like this, and if they were left-handed, they would approach like this, and they'd approach us, and they'd say, "Hi, how are you doing today? You having a good day? Are you okay out here? What's going on? Or you need some help?" You know? And my response would be, yes, the help you can give us is please take your hands off your handgun. We are not your enemy. I wouldn't do that right away. Because I'm not naive. I'm not naive to the stress. I'm not naive to the condition that they've been put under, the conditioning they've had to go through to do their job. They see everyone as the enemy. We live in a culture that's fear-based. Anything different from us is the enemy. If we want the world to be different, we have to be willing to live differently. It doesn't matter what I think, it doesn't matter what I say, it matters what I do. And it's impossible to live differently without a disciplined practice rooted in self-reflection. To wake up, to become conscious of how I'm conditioned, and to see how that conditioning manifests itself in my world. I don't know, so sort of like the late 1990s, early 2000s. I was invited to come to Switzerland, and I arrived in Switzerland. I arrived by plane, and in the airport in Zurich, and then I traveled by train from the airport in Zurich to Zurich Hauptbahnhof, the main train station, and then from Zurich, from the main train station, I went to another city named Winterthur. Winterthur. Now, I don't take intoxicants. It means no alcohol, no drugs, legal or illegal. I don't eat meat, fish, or poultry. I don't do tobacco products. So I get onto the train, and the attitudes around smoking in Europe, especially in Europe at that time, are much different than here. You know, so there's just a small non-smoking section, but it's really marked big red circle with a cigarette with a line through it. So I'm sitting in this non-smoking section, and this young guy gets on the train, right? And the first thing he did is he took out a box of cigarettes and put a cigarette in his mouth. And I went, oh, I wonder how this is going to work. And I thought, well, maybe, you know, he's going to move or something. But then he takes a lighter out, and he lights a cigarette, right? And I go, I mean, this doesn't work for me, you know? How am I going to deal with it? I sum it up. I'm in robes, right? So I sum up all of my holiness. And I approach this young guy. And I didn't, at the time I spoke very little German. So I just tapped the guy on the shoulder and I pointed to the non-smoking sign. You know? And he promptly took the cigarette, took a big drag off the cigarette, and just blew the smoke right over my head. Ooh, man. The feelings that welled up in me and the thoughts that started, the first thing I wanted to do, the first thought I had in my mind was to grab this kid by the throat and push him right through those doors on the side of the train and throw him off the train. Really, that was the first thought that came to my mind. Because what he did was he committed an act of aggression. And I'm trained to deal with aggression in a particular way. He was suddenly the enemy. The next thought in my mind was I could just rip the cigarette out of his mouth and put it on the floor and put it out. But because of this practice, because of being willing to live in a different relationship with my conditioning, with my unpeacefulness, I can be present to those thoughts and those feelings, and I don't have to act. I don't reject them, nor am I attached to them. So the next thought that sort of, as I'm not acting, these thoughts are pretty quick. The next thought that entered my mind was, wow, man, I wonder how that would look in the Swiss newspapers. Zen monk throws young Swiss boy off train to death. And I went, no, that wouldn't look good, man. Because there it would be again, you know, crazy Vietnam veteran. And then it would be Zen Buddhist monk, the sect. Because in Europe, often Buddhist practice is looked at as a sect, because it's not organized. It's not the organized religion that they're glommed onto. I want the world to be different. And I don't have a prescribed idea of what that's supposed to mean. I don't know what equality means. I don't know what peace is. I don't really have any fixed notions about this. What I do know is that I have the capacity to bring an end to war in my lifetime. Because the roots of war are in me. And if I'm willing to be as fully available as I can to my conditioning, to my suffering, then I can learn to live in another relation, or a more conscious relation with that. And it's through that process that war ends. Peace is not a political process. The government is not responsible for it. I am. The roots of war are me. The seeds of peace are in me. If we want the world to be different, it can be. If we let go of our ideas of what it's supposed to be, turn the light inward. As we continue to engage with the world around us, I don't live cloistered in a monastery. I live out in the world. Healing and transformation can take place. It's not the absence of suffering. It's learning to live in right relationship with the reality of our lives as they exist. But enough talking to you. I will now stop, and I'll open this up for your questions. You can ask me any question you want. Nothing is out of bounds. However, if you ask a question, please ask a question. Don't make a statement. And if you ask a question, this is not license for you to give a co-lecture. So please ask your questions short and to the point, as succinctly as possible. I would say, I don't know, yesterday I did 12 words or less. And it worked pretty good, you know. I was impressed. Yeah. If you need 13 or 14 words, you can have them. But please, and I don't want to argue or debate. Whatever your position is, whatever you believe, I'll tell you in advance it's already correct. Okay? You had a question.
How did you deal with the Swiss boy?
Well, the next step for me was to go, okay, so how important is this? So I just picked up my things and I moved. Now, interestingly enough, the person who had invited me to facilitate a meditation retreat and to do a public talk in Winterthur met me at the train station. Then he took me to a place. We got a small sandwich, and we were sitting in the park, there. And I was talking with him, and I was telling him about the story, and I looked up, and there was this young guy. He was walking across the park with a young woman. And I was like so excited because I had somebody who could translate for me. So I jumped up and I started to run towards this young guy. Man, you should have seen his face. All the color just went right out of his face. I mean, I can't imagine what was going through his head. So what I understood was that he realized what he'd done. But what happened is I ended up having a dialogue with him because I had translation, and we talked for, I don't know, 45 minutes or an hour. And I legitimately believe that he did not really get it. That what he did was commit an act of violence and aggression against me. What he thought he was doing was exercising his own freedom, his own right to do what he wanted to do in his space. He was just misguided. Yeah. Freedom of speech, freedom of action doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want, wherever you want, with whomever you want. There are some guidelines around that. And he came, and I think by the time it was done, he came to a different understanding. Had I followed those same thoughts, had I followed the original thought pattern through, or been controlled by my actions, I don't know what would have gone developed out of that, but it wouldn't have been good. You know? Teach him a lesson. Yeah. I was able to. A lesson was learned by both of us. Good question.
How did you meet Zen Buddhism?
Yeah. I went to a veterans retreat that was facilitated by a Buddhist monk in 1990. The assistant of that monk invited me to come to their monastery for a retreat. The person who facilitated that retreat was Vietnamese, my enemy. Now, they invited me to come to their monastery in France. And it was very interesting how that process evolved for me. I remember this nun saying to me, "Come to our monastery, let us help you. We can help you." And I had never had anyone in this country ever say that to me. And I'd always wanted to hear it. Not with any sincerity. And she had a level of sincerity that resonated with me. At the time, I am unemployable. I'm able to do this, but I don't get paid for this. This works for me. I didn't have any money. I didn't have a job. I didn't know how I was going to do this. I said, well, I can't. I'd really like to come, but I can't. There's no way I can buy the ticket. And the nun said to me, "You make the commitment. Let's see what happens." So I said, "Okay, I'll come." 2 hours after I made that commitment, I was filled with fear. And my fear was manifesting itself in my thoughts in this way. The only reason they want to bring you to their monastery is that when you get there, they're going to take you prisoner, put you in behind bars, they're going to try you for war crimes, and then they're either going to kill you or keep you in prison for the rest of your life. That's what my mind was telling me based on the feelings and emotions that were rising up after they invited me. Because why would the Vietnamese want to invite me to their monastery? Why would they want to help me after what I had done? I was a crew chief. I was a helicopter crew chief. I crewed gunships and I crewed slick ships. Slick ships are the troops that are the helicopters that carry troops into battle, extracted them, resupplied infantry. They did medical evacuations, those kinds of things. But really, in the first couple months of my military service, I was directly responsible for a lot of death and destruction. I saw it. We counted the people that we killed, because before we left to go out on missions that day, that we would get together and we'd pool our money. And the group with the most confirmed kills got the pool, like a football pool. That's a dehumanization. That's the consequence of dehumanization. It's not a good thing. See, I had to come to... in coming to terms with my combat service, I had a great realization that came as a result of my commitment here. Is that I'm not a good or a bad person because of what I did. I am responsible. Now what do I do? And I have to give up all my ideas of what I think I'm supposed to do. And through this practice, a disciplined spiritual practice rooted in self-reflection, what to do is revealed to me. So, after, I went there for, I went. I just said, well, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Maybe then I'll be free from all of this suffering. So when I got there, I was there with the intention to stay, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. And I ended up staying for 3 years. But what was going on, I was asked to ordain in that lineage, and it just didn't feel right to me. So I left, came back to the U.S., and within a month I met an American Zen Buddhist teacher. He was located at that time in Yonkers, New York. And I actually met I learned about him when I was in Colorado, and I met him in Yonkers. And the second time I met him, he said, I want to ordain you. I went, you what? You want to do what? I said, you don't even know me. But see, this was years ago, so I was still quite edgy. So my language wasn't as nice and polite. You know, but you don't even know me. And he said, he just looked at me and said, I know you enough. And then I said, well, what do you want from me? Because being a veteran, especially a combat veteran, we belong to a subset of people who are readily and easily exploited from a number of different angles. The government uses us, they hold us up, especially disabled vets. They hold us up as heroes, and they do all this hero stuff so that they can justify their actions. So look at how they're courageous and all that nonsense. They don't really care about us. They don't care what our lives are like. They just don't care. It's about their ideology and forwarding their agenda, whatever that is, and I don't think they even know. People in these peace movements, they love to have vets, combat vets there, because it's like, oh, look how successful we are. You know, it's a feather. We're a feather in their cap. But they don't really care about us or what we're experiencing, what we're going through. They're not. I'm not talking in generalities. There are exceptions to all of these rules. There are. I'm aware of that. But I'm talking generally. So I'm jaded. And I thought, well, I mean, because that's sort of what I was experiencing in this community that I left. So I just said, well, what do you want from me? You know. And the guy said, all I want you to do is to continue to practice meditation and do what you're doing. Now, it was the right thing to say. It wasn't quite true, because it involved more than that. But it got me to thinking. And so I decided, you know, I kept interacting with this community, and I decided to accept the invitation, because I was going to do this pilgrimage anyway. I was going to walk from Poland to Vietnam. So I accepted this invitation. I said, okay, let's do this. You know, let's just do this thing, man. Because I just said to myself, well, if it doesn't work, you know, I just do something else. You know, and so, but once I became ordained, with each passing day, while I was walking on this pilgrimage, it just became clear to me that this way of living, for me, was just the best in the world. That this is something that I always somehow wanted, this kind of life, since I was a young boy. And I felt like now I had an opportunity and a framework and a container to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So that's how I came to this, to be ordained in this particular tradition and lineage. Question? Yes, please. Yeah.
How do you speak to people, or how would you persuade or influence people who believe that looking inward for peace is a way of evading the responsibilities of political confrontation and decisive action for social justice?
Yeah, I wouldn't even try. Honestly, I wouldn't do it. Because if this is what they believe to be true, then there's really nothing that I'm going to be able to say to them that are going to, unless they're interested to talk to me about the subject. I'm not going to approach somebody who hasn't invited me in. I'm not going to force my ideas or opinions on somebody else. That's an act of war. If this is what they believe to be true, then they're going to do it. I'm not going to interfere with them. However, if they ask me, or they want, or somehow they get exposed to me, then I will talk to them much like I've talked to you. The point is, it's like, I'm politically confrontative, just by the way I live my life. But I don't seek out adversarial relations with people in positions of political influence or power. I've been invited to meet with presidents of different countries. I've met with influential politicians in countries all around the world, including the United States. I've been invited to come to Washington, D.C., to Marymount University, where I'm going to do a talk together with a congressman who's written a book called A Mindful Nation. I don't know anything about this guy. But my job is not to persuade you of the wrongness of your position. My job is to live my life as centered and disciplined as I can on what is revealed to me to be the truth. Not my ideas of it, but it's rooted in the reality that violence is never a solution. Violence only gets more violence. Anger only breeds more anger. Hatred only breeds more hatred. Greed only gets more greed. And I vote. Question? You had a question.
Have Buddhists ever been involved in any wars at all?
Yes, they have. Actually, there's a very interesting book. The title of the book is Zen at War. And it's written by a man named Brian Victoria. And it really goes into Japan's history, Zen history in Japan. Now, there's a lot of the first wave of Japanese Zen teachers who came to the U.S. post the Second War have a history with Imperial Japan, and they were supportive of the efforts of Imperial Japan. A lot of them in their writings were racist. They supported because Japan was sort of somehow allied with the Axis powers, and so they echoed those anti-Semitic themes. There were a very well-known Japanese Zen Buddhist scholar, one of the most influential in this country, a man named D.T. Suzuki. In his early 20s, studying in Japan, he wrote an article called Zen and the Sword. In this article, what he professed was that the sword in the hand of an enlightened being is not an instrument of killing, but an instrument of liberation. The sword in the hand of an unenlightened being is just an instrument of a butcher. Now, the Japanese, when they invaded China, they used this argument to excuse the atrocities that they committed against the Chinese people. The Japanese leadership, military leadership, used as an argument when they said, "We are not really killing you, we're liberating you. Because we know the true Buddhism and your society has become corrupted." But see, this is what happens. When you take essential teachings and they become institutionalized, they immediately become capitulated. Because then it's not about the essential teachings, it's about how do you manipulate these teachings to get a larger market share. And that's true whether it's Buddhist teachings, Christian teachings, Jewish, Islamic, Baha'i, Zoroastrian, Hindu. The essential teachings are not about profit and gain. It's clearly written in the theology that we are not to use these teachings for profit or gain, ever. Everything I do for free. If you want, I live in a world that's run by money, so you got to get me here. So then it means you got to pay for the transportation. But I make an effort to keep those costs as low as possible. You know? And people support me. If they support me, if they don't support me, then I don't eat. If they don't support me, then I live outside. This is just the way I've committed to live my life, because it's more in line with these essential teachings. But I don't impose that on others unless they study with me. You study with me, and this is the deal, you know. But so yes, there is, you know, when the teachings become institutionalized, yes. I mean, you look at Sri Lanka currently, the conflict in Sri Lanka, and you look at Buddhist monks taking sides taking sides against the Tamils. The Tamils are not Buddhist. I think they're Islamic. And so they're taking sides against the Tamils, degrading and so. But this is not about Buddhist teaching. This is about individuals and their lack of awareness. It's the same in any of these traditions. Yeah. Yes?
Now, my other question is, how do you manage to live without money? I mean, I started growing a garden to not be so, you know, like you said, reliant on the system, but still, we live in a world, like you said, that's run by money. So.
Well, like I said, for example, I came here from the northwest part of Florida. I drove down by rental car. But there's money available to pay for that rental car and to pay for the fuel and the tolls. That's offered to me. If it's not offered to me, I don't come. I live in a meditation center up there, and the meditation center belongs to a foundation. Kenshin will talk to you about that foundation. So people are interested to support the work or the activities that are generated by my movements around the world. Then if they want to support that, there are innumerable ways they can do that. One way is to donate. They donate to this foundation, though, not to me. The profits from this book, they don't come to me. They go to that foundation to support the work, buying books for people in prison, or supporting, being able to support. Sometimes, like, I'm invited into schools. Schools don't have the resources. So then the foundation, because of people's generosity, can then support that work in the schools because it is important. So money is part of the process, but what I don't do specifically for money. Tim O'Brien, another Vietnam veteran writer, if he were to come here, it cost you at least a minimum $35K. And he wouldn't come unless it was a guaranteed audience of X amount of people. And a lot of really well-known teachers, spiritual teachers, that's the deal with them. They won't come unless there's X amount of people, and this is the fee. That's not the point of this. Whether there's one person or there's 10,000, I accept the invitation. As long as you cover, as long as you can get me there, give me a simple place to stay and simple food to eat. That's it. I eat one meal a day. Kenshin and I. I have my medicine in the evening. It's a bowl of popcorn. But that's also, I'm easy. Yeah. There's always a way. Yeah.
Can women be ordained?
Say it again?
Can women be ordained?
Yeah, absolutely. Ordained and hold parallel status. Now, Kenshin is a novice at this point. You'll know when she's ordained because she shaves her head too and keeps it shaved. That's the commitment. Just because of that reason. The attachment. Is it part of the head shaving is to work with the topic of attachment. Yeah. Question.
What is the bell?
Aha, Kenshin, you're on.
Yeah.
Oh, great. That's the bell question.
I was wondering.
I did it yesterday. I'm going to do it today too. What was your first thought when you heard the bell?
Just stop.
Yeah, great. That's exactly it. So that's also what Claude AnShin does. So it is this moment of pausing and reconnecting with your breath. So basically what the voice of the bell says, don't be in such a rush, just take a breath, reconnect with the present moment, and then move on. That's the basic definition of mindfulness or also of meditation practice. The ability to stop, be reflective, and then do the next right thing. So in the talks we use it to introduce this quality without really explaining it. So it's not that we start and say, by the way, today we're going to use this bell, and every so often you will hear it, so when you hear it, please do this. But it's more, we introduce it and just see how people work with it. Ultimately, it supports Claude AnShin because it allows him the same practice to not be in a rush. And it's also a way to pace the evening or the talk whenever we do the talk. So it's at certain intervals that I invite the bell. It's not, I've had people say, you always invited the bell when he was using the word killing. And I said, no. So it's really randomly in that way, just that it goes by time. And this way it becomes also a way to communicate with him that time has passed. And like I did 2 bells at half an hour, so to indicate, after a certain time might be good to start with question and responses. And so there is this topic of how can we find, because I'm not running around the whole day doing this, but how can we find these bells of mindfulness in our daily life? But that has to be a conscious choice, where you say, instead of being angry at the traffic light turning red, can I take that moment to do that? Reconnect with my breath and just center myself more on the present moment instead of already being 1,000 miles down the road doing the next thing that I'm not yet doing. Or, it could, some people, wear a thread around their wrist saying, okay, when I do notice it, let me just take that moment to remember, like the importance of life, and let me reconnect with my breath. It could be the telephone ringing, it could be a dog barking, it could also be just a strong emotion. So how can we find elements in our daily life where we have a commitment, when this happens, I'm just going to practice this? Because if you don't have those reminders, you're not going to do it, so you will not benefit from breath awareness, which is a great tool to reconnect with the present moment, where anything that has to happen in the present moment, because nothing else is available to us. The past is already gone, the future is just about to arrive, and so it's in this way that we then work with the bell. And I was just curious, though, because I was just thinking, well, we might just finish this talk, and I might say to Professor McGetchen, see, no one asked. Like, everyone is like wondering what she's doing with the bell, but no one asked. But you did, so I really appreciate that you did. Thank you.
Question?
Okay, no questions? Time to bring the evening to a close. I'll do that in a rather usual way for me. In the tradition I'm ordained, we bow. But this is a very specific ritualized spiritual practice. We're taught to press our palms together with our thumb tips touching. And then we rest the thumb tips on the first knuckle. Then the tip of the longest finger is parallel with the tip of the nose. We're not too stiff, or we're not too casual. Just precise. And then when we bow only at the waist, nothing else moves. And we don't lose contact with who or what we're bowing to. In Japanese, the name of the form is Gassho, G-A-S-S-H-O, Gassho. So in Gassho, I bow to Kenshin. For for her courage, for her support, and for creating the container that has held us in this hour and a half of meditation practice together. It's what we've been doing. This is a meditation practice. Listening and speaking. In conscious awareness. So in Gasho, I bow to Professor Megetchen. In gratitude for the courage to invite me here, to give me the opportunity to meet a new and a new group of people. Also, for providing Kenshin and I with a safe place to stay and nice, simple food to eat, and high-speed internet access. Then to all of you, Buddhas to be, I bow to you in gratitude. Now, this Buddha thing, please understand that Buddha is not a god or someone that we worship. The icons you'll see on a Buddhist altar are not entities that we worship. Some people may, but they're just misguided. The Buddha isn't even the guy's name. The guy's name, who we call Buddha, was Siddhartha Shakyamuni. Shakyamuni was a tribal name for him. He was the son of a king. And the term Buddha simply means awake or enlightened. So when I refer to you as Buddhas to be, I refer to the fact that you are already enlightened. However, because of our conditioning, because of the nature of suffering, our conditioning, our suffering prevents us from living our awakened nature. So I wear robes as a symbol of my commitment to serve Buddha, your enlightened nature. You are all Buddha. So I am committed to be of service to you. That's the reason it's the reason I do what I do. It's the reason I exist. It's about all of you. And the interconnected reality of which I'm a part of. And how my activities in the world bring me in contact with my own suffering, and with that awareness and this discipline, the process then of transformation is then possible. I really appreciate your coming out this evening. I really appreciate your attention, your questions. I would ask you please to hold your seats for just a few minutes, give Kenshin some of your time. I do want to mention that in April, I will be facilitating a meditation retreat for soldiers, former soldiers, active duty soldiers, and their immediate family members. There is a number limit. The retreat is at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. If you're interested in this retreat, you can look at eomega.org. There the information will be listed. Now, there is someone who really appreciates the work that I have been that I have the privilege to be able to do in terms of supporting veterans, and he's provided a really sizable amount of money for scholarships. So all the money you really need is to get yourself there. You apply for a scholarship and no one will be turned away because of lack of money. He said he just made it to me. He said, whatever you need, you tell me. So I just wanted to let you know that that's happening, and if you are a veteran or an immediate family member of a veteran, or if you know someone, pass that information on to them. Okay. Yeah.
So just for a few minutes, basically it's just about the information material that is on the table over there. So I did bring some copies of Claude AnShin's book. If you like it signed, just sit down with him and he will take time to really sign it, not just scribble something that you can read. And there is a sign-up sheet just for contact information. If this is something you want to do, there is a small sticker that says breathe if you want to promote not forgetting this incredible tool. There is also the announcement from the Omega Institute. You find it, of course, also online, but I did get one of the magazines, so I brought it along. And then there's our donation box. I think that's all. The Zelf Foundation is a nonprofit that is spiritually based. Our focus is on this, how to work with trauma, the transformation of trauma, healing in this practical sense. For the most part, it is really about the application of meditation and mindfulness, some communication skills, the communalization of our trauma. So we have been dedicating our attention to organizing these sort of retreats, like at the Omega Institute, public talks to that matter. We have organized pilgrimages and street retreats. So I think what I like the best about organization is it is about the individual. I mean, reaching the individual. I don't think that we're really about the masses, but just know that any change that needs to happen, that we want to be substantial, needs to be about the individual. It's a slower process, but it's much more meaningful and, again, substantial than often dealing with the masses. There is a schedule on the website. We are also on Facebook. So if you want to learn more about what they do, perhaps read up on some materials that they offer, I suggest you do that. Or if you do like to leave the contact information, we want to send out, we haven't done it recently, but we want to more often send out also small newsletters of, encouraging this topic, encouraging reflection. Because very often it can happen that we just sink into this place of feeling powerless and there's nothing we can do and no one else is doing anything and what the heck. But, we can be that difference, and if we join together, we can support each other. I do want to just quickly say something about this practice of generosity, which in this tradition is really how we share our time, energy, and resources. And I think the most important part that I want to bring your attention to or ask you to reflect on is this issue that if you look at life, it really has different components, one being material, let's say physical, mental, and spiritual. And we do spend a lot of time on the physical, making sure that we have everything we need to be safe physically. And we do also do mental things. But often we really neglect the spiritual. And so if you look at our resources, how much of our time and in resources do we really also make sure are spent in the spiritual way? And there might be spiritual for our own growth, but it's also, spiritual in the sense, how am I connected to others? How are others connected to me? And so I think there is a big lack. And our society also shows that, like that we have the mental and the physical often covered, but we are still, on an inner level, we are kind of starving. So that is more what this practice invites us to look at with this practice of generosity. It is about sharing. It is about us receiving, and it is about us giving out. So just as a thought to chew on. Otherwise, I'm really pleased that the invitation came through from FAU. It has been a privilege to be here the last 3 days, and I hope somehow we can be back, as I strongly support this program of peace studies. Even so, it still can often be highly intellectual and heady, but nevertheless, there's also quite a bit of approach of integrating a spiritual aspect. And thank you for coming out. If you still have questions, we hang out a little bit afterwards. And just thanks and good night.
Thank you.
When I go to